Welcome to Forest Chat, where we talk about individual endeavour in Western Australia, what it takes, what it means, and how you do it. I'm your host, Paul Vandermeer, and today we're talking with Alison Kidman about walking the Camino Trail. Alison has known about the Camino Trail for many years, but she never thought that she was able to achieve that. Later in life, she decided to run a marathon. Doing the marathon gave Alison the motivation and the drive and the belief that she was able to take on something like the Camino Trail, and she has. Welcome to Forest Chat, Alison.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for inviting me. I've been really enjoying and being inspired by and intrigued by and interested in all the other episodes of your podcast, so I hope that people feel similarly from my story.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm sure they will, Alison. The broad range of stories we bring to Forest Chat is an element of that interest. And yes, thank you for your support of the podcast as well. Alison, we're talking about the Camino Trail. What on earth is the Camino Trail?
Okay, I can give you a quick and dirty history, and don't quote me on any of this, but Camino is Spanish for the way or the path, so it's really a path. And Santiago translates to St. James, so Iago is James in Spanish. So it's the way of St. James, and St. James was an apostle back in the day, and the apostles were sent out, I think, from Jerusalem to spread the word of God. So St. James went to what is now Galicia in northwestern Spain. And anyway, he came back and said to the king at the time, look, I've been a bit of a failure. I haven't really converted many people. So the king promptly beheaded him. And so some of James's disciples took his body back to Galicia and buried him. And that was the end of that. They knew where his body was. They died, and so nobody knew where he was. And then some centuries later, somebody found some bones in a field and went to the local bishop and said, I think this is the body of St. James. And the bishop agreed, so he built a church which was called Santiago, the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela, Compostela meaning field of stars, because it was this field under the stars where the bones were found. And so then people started making pilgrimages to pay their respects to St. James. They might have had some ailments that they were hoping would be fixed by making a pilgrimage there. And it grew from there. So we're talking about somewhere around the 9th century. So this is many thousands of years the Camino has been there for. So people were just leaving their homes in Europe, wherever they were in Europe, and making a pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela. And so then, because so many people were hiking through making a Camino, services started popping up along the way. So people would offer food, they'd offer lodgings. There's various monasteries through Europe, so they would be offering shelter and things for pilgrims along the way. And then it got to, so people would make a pilgrimage and then go back home. And how did people know they weren't just saying they did it and just going around the block and coming home? So the scallop shell became the symbol for the Camino, because Santiago de Compostela is probably about 50 k's from the coast of Galicia, but scallop shells proliferate along that coast. So the thing that they would do was take a scallop shell back to say, yes, I did actually go.
So this is Strava before computers.
Before Strava, yes. So that became the symbol of the Camino, and today lodgings will have a scallop shell embedded above the doorway to show that they are, and you're still called a pilgrim if you walk the Camino today. Yes, there's scallop shells at various pilgrim hostels and that sort of thing, and a lot of villages along the way they'll mark the way with scallop shells in and out of the village and all that sort of thing. So there's some really nice traditions that have built up over these thousands of years. And another one is that you have a pilgrim passport. And you get a stamp in your passport, and you all the way until you get to the cathedral, and you can get a certificate then to show that you've walked
actually
it,
followed
that
the
you've,
path.
Yes, and so the passports also have the thing of, so, now there's like about 350,000 people arrive at the cathedral every year.
That's a lot.
And that's a lot, and possibly more since COVID. So there's a lot throughout Europe, there's a lot of lodgings and hostels and that sort of thing. And they're for pilgrims. They're not for just Joe Blow who's decided to backpack for a few weeks. So having your pilgrim passport is a way to show that, yes, I'm a genuine, I'm walking towards the cathedral. I haven't just slung a backpack on because I've got a uni break or something. I'm actually walking towards the cathedral. So, yeah, there's that about it. And so you get a sense of history because it is something that's been around for so long. So, very interesting.
And lots of people are actually walking it, which
They
is
are.
very interesting.
Yep.
And how long is the trail? Where does it start and finish? And
Oh, okay. So when I first heard about it, I'd heard that this Camino in Spain. So I thought there was the Camino, which there certainly is one in Spain, which is about 750 kilometres. And it starts at a little village on the France and Spanish border called Saint-Jean-Pied-du-Port and goes through Spain over the Pyrenees and finishes at Santiago de Compostela. But then I found out that there's actually lots of trails because they come all through Europe, and so I walked this with my sister Josie, and when we were talking about it, one of her friends had said, the Camino's not just this one through Spain. And no, we didn't know that. And anyway, they had actually walked through France, which that one is called the Via Podiensis, which starts in a place called Le Puy-en-Velay, which is in the southeast of France. And so that's also 750 kilometres, but you're walking in France and you're starting in the east and you walk west and you finish at Saint-Jean-Pied-du-Port, where the other one. So a lot of people will start in France and carry on and go right through to Spain and do 1,500 kilometres.
oh wow! So it's like they're end to end.
Yes.
They're not meeting at the end point.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we had decided that we would finish at Saint-Jean-Pied-du-Port. But when we were actually getting towards the finish, we actually really wished that we had planned to go right to the cathedral, because some of the other people that we were meeting along the way were going right ahead. So when we came back, I thought, I've really got unfinished business. And so my husband and I actually went a few months ago. So there's another one that comes from Portugal. So that's called the Camino Portuguese. And that's 600 kilometres, and you can walk from Lisbon up to Santiago. But we started in Porto. So we did about 270 kilometres. But it did give me the experience of actually finishing at the cathedral, it takes your breath away. You come up the street and there's a plaza and the cathedral opens up in front of you. And you just have this sensation that you're doing this thing that people have been doing for thousands of years. And even though I'm not Catholic, I don't have any affinity, it's just the knowing that so many people have done this before you and you're a dot in the universe, really. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So that'll be something to talk about when we ask about the meaning of what you've done.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. And the trail, what sort of trail is it?
It's trail. It's apart from when you go through villages, and you're going through, it's very rural France. So if you imagine, people are familiar with Western Australia. It's kind of like, you're walking around in Dumbleyung, Lake Grace. There's tiny, except the villages there's villages every 5 k's or something you can see. And if you're not walking through a village, you can see one over on a hill. But they're tiny villages. There's paved roads in and out of the villages. But most of the time you're walking, there's a lot of in and out of river gorges. You're following the Lot River for quite a way, so you'll come up the top of the gorge, and then and you just know that you're going to go back down again, and then you just know that you're going to come back up again.
Got plenty of distance to do that.
Yes, and and you're going across paddocks and through forest, and very rocky, very hilly, extraordinarily scenic, beautiful. Yeah.
It really is a walk across the countryside to
Yes.
get to where you're going.
Yes, and because it's rural France, and they actually really embrace the Camino, because we just know in Australia that people have gradually been migrating to the coast. That some of these little country towns really struggle because they've lost their bank, they've lost their post office, all the kids have gone off and not come back. So it's similar in France, in these rural parts of France. So the Camino for them brings people coming through, and it's become in some ways, their lifeblood. It just keeps people coming through. You're welcome. They welcome you.
Really good to hear that.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool.
They do embrace it, and in a way that you're walking and you'll come across, you might be walking along the back of someone's paddock, and there'll be a tree, and there'll be a bench under the tree and a sign saying, "Pilgrims, sit down, have a rest." So they do things like this, or there might be a table with a flask of tea and a flask of coffee and a little container of cakes that might be a specialty of the region, and just a donation box. Pilgrims,
Have
coffee.
a cuppa, have a piece of cake, or
Yeah, and
whatever.
you just see this all along, and it's just amazing. Yeah,
it's an ongoing event. by
It
the sound
is.
of-
Yeah, and just the way they embrace it, and it's just another thing that it's been going for so long, so many thousands of years, that you're part of a tradition. Yeah.
And how long does it take to actually walk the?
So we set out, we thought we would do average about 20 k's a day, and it kind of varied around that because things come in like, can you get accommodation? You're not going to get accommodation neatly every 20 kilometres, but that was probably our average. Some days we might have walked 28, some days we might have done 18. But it took us, so it was 5 weeks.
5 weeks walking every day.
Yes,
So,
yep.
so what are you talking? 35 days of.
Yes, about 35, yeah. And we had a flight to catch at the end of it, so we did have to make sure we
Hit all your stops.
Well, if we didn't, we had to make it. We might have had to make it up, walk extra, or didn't actually come to that. But yeah, it was fine. But yeah, so that's how long we took. Around 5 weeks.
And
Yeah.
is there lots of information to help you plan that, Al?
There is lots. So a lot of people might be familiar with a movie called The Way, which stars Martin Sheen. His son sets out to do the Camino and dies, so Martin Sheen goes over there and in his, whatever his character is, I can't remember, and walks it on behalf of his son. It's quite a good movie. It pops up on SBS every now and then. There's novels being written about it, there's documentaries, there's blogs, there's Facebook groups, there's printed guidebooks, maps. So there's actually a lot of information. It's not hard to do a lot of homework if you're thinking of doing it.
You look around enough and you'll have more than enough information to do your planning.
You will probably
do it
have
yourself,
too
yeah.
much. Yeah.
Too much.
Too much, yeah. That kind of happened to us. So what happened to us, we were planning to do it in May of 2020, and we booked our flights at the end of January in 2020, and I'm sure we all remember what happened between January and May in 2020. COVID came along and the world as we knew it basically turned upside down. So we were determined that we were still going to do this Camino. We didn't know how long we were going to have to wait. And as it turned out, so we didn't get our flights refunded, we just had them held for us. We had faith that things would pick up and that the airline was going to come back and we'd be able to do it. And so as it turned out, we did it in September 2022.
So a couple of years later.
Yeah,
than
about 2.5 years.
anticipated.
But what had happened was, because I had done so much reading and everything in preparation for May 2020, when it came to 2022, we just thought and we'd had this experience of COVID where stuff can happen. You just don't know what's going to happen. We certainly had knowledge of it because we had done this preparation, but we thought we're just going to go and do it this time. We didn't book too much in advance. We wanted to be as flexible as we could. But I would recommend having good knowledge first. But yes, you can have information overload and you'll just confuse yourself and it gets too much.
It's a lot to hold in.
Yeah, yeah.
Alison, what does it take you to do a walk like the Camino Trail?
So you need to be fit. We encountered lots of people who weren't particularly fit, and I think you'll just have a more enjoyable experience if you're fit and you know your body and you know the type of gear that suits you. There are people get appalling blisters, and we always come across people where there might be a stream or wherever there was a bit of water, there'd be someone with their boots off with their feet in the water because
they needed some relief.
They were so uncomfortable. You're just going to enjoy it much more if you have a level of fitness, especially if you're going to do like a 4, 5, 6 weeks or longer. You'll find that a lot of French people just dip in and out in the same way that we might do the Bibbulmun because it's there and we're here. We're close to it. They can do 2 weeks in their annual holidays or whatever. But if you're coming from further away and you're going to do the whole thing because that's your one go at it, you need to be quite fit and ready to handle the physicalness of it. Most days, the elevation that we were covering was between 600 and 1,000 metres. So that's quite a bit of elevation.
It is.
Yeah, and we had, because we'd been reading people's blogs and whatever, and people had been saying, oh, we're quite fit and we found it really hard. And we were thinking, oh, we're pretty fit. We're used to it. We've walked parts of the Bibbulmun that are pretty strenuous. We'll be fine. And it was actually it was really physically challenging, more so than what we thought. And partly due to September, it was going into their autumn. And so we were counting on it being around 25-ish degrees. And it was more like 35 and there were days where it's 37. So that was way hotter and Europe was just coming off an extraordinarily hot summer where it had been over 40 a lot of days. And people who were walking in that sort of weather were having to just not walk. It was too hot. So they'd have to catch a taxi or get some public transport because it was just too uncomfortable to walk. And so fortunately for us it had cooled down, but it was still 10 degrees hotter most days than what we were counting on. So that takes it out of you as well, especially when you're doing a lot of elevation. And it's very rocky in places. You need all your wits about you. So we were glad that we had the level of fitness that we had. And even now when we look back, when we talk about it, we think, oh, we can't believe we got through that day because it was just very challenging.
And how did your fitness change during the walk?
You get very backpack fit because at that stage neither of us had really walked. We'd just carried day packs when we'd been doing any hikes in Australia. She and I had done the Cape to Cape together, but we'd gone back and stayed at the same accommodation every night. So we'd only really taken a hydration pack. So to carry a backpack, it's weight on your back and on your shoulders, and so you get fit in that way. You get more of probably a bit more stronger because you're carrying a bit of, not a lot of weight, because we pack light, but yes, it's just different. Yeah, so you get fitter along the way. Maybe the first week is hard, but then you get in the routine and you get used to it. Yeah.
And then it becomes your new normal level of fitness.
It does, yeah, yep. And the thing of, I talked about how the elevation, you're walking in parts of France where these villages have been there since the 9th century or whenever they're the old stone houses and everything. And so back then, in medieval times, they didn't have mobile phones. So villages was either built on a very high, the highest hill they could see, so that they could look around and see who was coming to get them, in which case you're hiking along and you've got to hike up the hill to where your lodging is for that night. Or else the villages are built way down in a valley where people won't see them to attack them. It's this constantly, if you've had to slog up the hill to your hostel for that night, you get a downhill in the morning. But if you've come down into the village at the end of the day, you know you've got an uphill at the start of the day. It's this constant up and down. But it all made it part of the fun. You also need an appreciation and sympathy for another culture. So you're not in Australia, you're in a different country. So you need to respect their ways of doing things. And one of the biggest, like Josie and I are both morning people, that first half hour before sunup is our favourite time of the day. France, they will look at you in horror if you want breakfast any time before 7 a.m. And in these lodgings, often they're actually people's homes. So they've just set up a bit of a dormitory. And you're eating with them. You eat the evening meal with them and they provide the bed for you, and then you're having breakfast with them. So you've got to fit in more to their way of life. And something we learnt really quickly, like we get up the first morning and there's a bowl on the table and we're thinking, oh, good, there's cereal for breakfast. No, that bowl is for coffee. So they drink coffee out of a bowl in the morning, but then throughout the day they drink it from a cup. Don't pour your coffee into, don't put your cereal in the bowl. There's a much smaller bowl that's actually for cereal. So I don't know why this is, but it is. So
and something you found out through experience.
We did. Yes. So they'll also look at you in horror if you do the wrong thing at the table. Yes, you need an open mind and to be friendly, because a lot of the places in France, which was one of its attractions for us, is that in the hostels they often have, like they'll have a dormitory. They're never very big, like there might be maybe 15 beds in a dormitory. And they'll also generally have a couple of double rooms and triple rooms. So you can, if you want to be a bit more private, you can, if you're lucky enough, you can book one of those. Generally in Spain, because that's where there's more of a convergence of all the Caminos, there's huge dormitories of 60 beds. So the bottom line is, though, even if it is only 15 beds or 10 or whatever, you might find yourself sleeping in a room with other people. You've got to get on with people. I mean, everyone's different. There was one time where I think there was only 6 of us in the room. But anyway, this guy, so we'd all had dinner and there was a Canadian guy who was lovely, really friendly. And we get into the room and he says, I snore really loudly. Would anybody like earplugs? And he had all these earplugs. And we all laughed politely and said, no, we'll be fine. So we all get into bed and he immediately starts snoring like a freight train. So if someone says they snore, believe them, and if they offer you earplugs, take them. So, and snoring's a fact of life. So take your own earplugs if you're a light sleeper, or you just have to be prepared to take what you find, really. Yeah, just got to be open-minded. And it could be you that's snoring, you never know. You need to work out ahead how far, what you're comfortable in walking in a day and plan around that. Like I said, for us it was around 20 k's, and there was one day where we did 35, but we knew, and that was because we couldn't get accommodation, but we knew that we would be able to do that 35 because the terrain of that day was not as intense as some of the other days and the weather was going to be nice. Yeah, so you just need to be aware of what distance you can cover in a day. And if you do need to ramp it up, you need to know that you're capable of doing that.
And also there's that little bit of looking forwards, knowing what's coming.
Yeah, and so you just need determination and resilience, because over a period of 5 weeks, the weather's not going to be perfect every day. It might rain, it might be windy, it might be hot, and we had all of those. I think as it turned out, we only had one day of reasonably heavy rain, but that did bring mud and we all slipped over, and it's serious mud too. You have to be determined that you're going to carry on no matter what. You can't be folding up and going home at the first bit of adversary that comes your way.
Yeah, that's interesting. That mud is a thing unto itself, isn't it? Especially when you're trying to move through it.
Even with hiking poles, this mud, some mud is just, and you can't walk around it. It's everywhere. You try and some of the way, but we were fortunate that we didn't actually have too much mud. So
You're not suggesting winter is a great time to do this then?
No, and the hostels are seasonal too. So generally they're open, so this is the Northern Hemisphere, so they're open, reliably open April till October, so probably beginning of April through to the end of October, so through the warmer months. So a lot of them will actually be closed over winter. People do walk in winter, but you have to be mindful of where you might be able to stay. And there's snow along, certainly you go across the Aubrac Plateau, and that gets covered in snow. And if you're a bit funny around animals, there's a lot of cows along the way, and particularly the Aubrac Plateau, you're walking in the paddocks with the cows, and there's a breed of cow which I think might be called the Aubrac. Actually, it's bred specifically for those conditions because it gets snow through to quite hot in summer. And they're enormous cows. They weigh about a tonne, but they're extremely docile, and they've been there for hundreds of years. And so pilgrims have been there for hundreds of years, so it's a bit of an understanding. But some people might find that a bit confronting because sometimes you're walking quite close to the cows.
But luckily they're fairly docile.
They're very docile, yeah. And they don't mind you taking photos and doing selfies, and they're pretty accommodating. You do need to be mindful of cow pats though.
I'll bet. Especially if you've got 1 tonne cow pat produced.
Yeah, quite big, yeah.
Is there anything else for the what does it take question?
There is a saying that the Camino provides. So everyone says, that the Camino provides, and there's endless stories of people running into difficulties, and the Camino has provided, and it does, but it's probably good to go into it with a certain amount of planning, and the Camino will provide if things do go pear-shaped, but don't expect that. Do your homework and go into it prepared, yeah. But it is nice, and people do look out for each other. We didn't actually see this, but we got friendly with this group there were 3 German ladies. So what happens is you meet people along the way, and you might be walking further than them that day. So they're staying somewhere different, but then the next day they catch you up. You meet people and then you don't see them for a few days and then you run into them again. Anyway, so these German ladies, and we'd actually bonded over salty chips because it was so hot. You're sweating a lot, and so you're just craving something salty at the end of the day. So our thing was that we would find the biggest packet of salty chips we could find and eat them. And these German ladies said, we drink beer and eat chips too. We know what you're about. But anyway, one of them unfortunately had tripped and fell, and she'd smashed her mouth, and she had a crown in her mouth, and that got broken. And we were in front of them that day, so we didn't know this had happened until the end of the day. But other pilgrims who spoke French had come to their aid, and someone had found a car and they'd got her to a dentist. And so people are really helpful that way. And if I can give anyone a pro tip, if you don't speak the language yourself, as soon as you can, befriend someone who does, because they come in really handy. One night we were going to go out to dinner, and we were in this tiny village and nothing was open, but this guy, Mario, who we got friendly with, spoke fluent French, and he cajoled a cafe because he could speak the language they said they didn't have any reservations, but because he spoke the language, he was able to convince them that they could squeeze us in.
Lucky, got your dinner.
So if you befriend someone that speaks the language, then you can open doors for you along the way. So
that's definitely a pro tip.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot to know about doing the Camino, and a lot of that information seems to be readily available if you choose to go and find it. And there's also a pro tip in there. We'll take a break now, and after the break, we'll have a look at what it means. We've had a look at what it takes to walk the Camino. Now, let's have a look at what it means. Alison, what does it mean to you, your family, or the community that you're able to walk the Camino Trail?
So for me, it was probably more of a personal thing. People walk, and we met people who were walking for all sorts of reasons. Some of them had some sort of traumatic experience and they just wanted to get away from it all and walk and think and that sort of thing. We were more looking for a physical challenge and an adventure and just a voyage of discovery really through rural France. It's so different. Australia is fascinating, and you get out in the bush and the history and especially the indigenous culture, it's there, but it's harder you've got to look for it. In Europe, it's visible. There's a castle on a hill that you can see from a distance. That kind of history was interesting, and it's the sort of thing where you think, oh, I wish I'd listened more at school. It was like a living history lesson as well. Yeah, lots of that sort of thing. Certainly going through France, I didn't realise, to me, Skittles, you get a Skittle set when you're 3 or 4 and it's like a plastic Skittles with a ball. It's huge in France. We came into a village where there was a Skittle tournament. There was an arena with tiered seating and scoreboards, and people would come from other villages. There were teams, and it was like our AFL almost. It was huge. I thought, didn't know. I can't remember whether it was called Skittles. Probably not because it was French, but that was interesting, that just the different sports and things that they have. And all along the way, I kept seeing these things that I could only describe as, and I thought of them as tall, skinny rabbit hutches. And I couldn't think what these, I thought, I don't think they have tall, skinny rabbits here. I couldn't think, and I just kept seeing these things. And it wasn't until we were right at the end, I actually saw one that had corn husks in it. What it is, because they grow a lot of corn. So these are what they put, the corn cobs, they put them in there for drying. So they get filled up with the corn because the corn needs to be dry, and then they use it for feed. I think they use it for stock feed and things. Yeah, so all those...
So the building or the structure takes on that shape of the corn.
If you can imagine a structure it's covered in like chicken wire, and it might be 1 metre wide, but it might be, say, 2 metres tall, and it'll be off the ground on a bit of a stand. So it just looks like a tall, skinny rabbit hutch. But that's what it's for, drying corn. It's just the different ways they do things. They have a thing in France, possibly other countries, but it's called the most beautiful villages. And it's a status that a village can sign on to. And the criteria, the village has to have less than 2,000 people, and it has to have at least 2 sites that are their heritage, recognised as heritage listed. And they have to be untouched by there won't be any modern buildings, there won't be a Hungry Jack's or something, that they've retained their originality. So the village is thousands of years old and it's maintained as that. It's not... When you're walking along the Via Podiensis, you actually go through a number of these villages. They're beautiful to look at, these old stone buildings, and it's actually amazing that they've managed to retrofit them with electricity and Wi-Fi, but they still look the same from the outside.
And that's interesting that there's actually some sort of deterrent for those towns to actually put up new architectural type buildings.
Yes, so when you walk through a number of these small villages like that, and it's a real assault on your senses. We came to a town called Cahors, which is probably about halfway, and it's probably got about 15,000 people, I think. But there was traffic lights and there were shops, and we just thought, get us out of here. It was too much because you get so used to the solitude and the peacefulness and the rhythm of just walking and the quietness. Yeah, it's quite different.
It's quite underrated, isn't it, that having that ability to be somewhere quiet and...
Absolutely, yes.
I'll say in nature, this is not always directly in nature, but certainly you're going through some pretty natural environments.
Yes, and you do have plenty of time to contemplate. We didn't set out to particularly do any sort of deep and meaningful introspection, but you just do as a natural consequence of doing this walking, and for me it definitely taught me to live more simply, because you've just got your backpack and you just put it on at the start of the day and off you go. And that's that rhythm. And I certainly thought, why have I got a house full of stuff at home when I'm living quite comfortably with what I'm carrying on my back? So when we did get home, I went through the house and I had a big clean out, and now I probably need to do it again. But yes, it certainly teaches you or renews what you might have already known, confirms what you might have already known, that we do carry around too much stuff, really. So,
Lots of baggage.
yes, yeah. So let things go, yeah. Try and keep things simple.
It sounds, almost cathartic in some ways. Not what you were there for, but clearly there are others who you said had been through stuff that they wanted to actually take that time out.
Yes, and I realised myself that, there's just as a natural consequence of doing this that, you can clear out your mind, whether you intended to or not, you end up doing it, And I can recommend doing that. Anybody, every now and then,
Absolutely. You can easily be filled up with all the things that go on. You look at, especially if you've got a TV going or something like that, there's just stuff constantly being tipped in, and it's all programmed to get you to do something.
I don't think the human brain was meant to cope with as much stuff, information that gets thrown at us all today. It's good to try and be still every now and then and be with your own thoughts. It has meaning for the French community because it keeps these little communities going. Yeah.
Gives them some purpose.
Yeah. And their economy and their life. It enables them to stay in that, because without the Camino going through, those communities would probably just die.
There are already plenty of communities you hear about through parts of Europe, particularly the more remote parts, I think, where you can pick up houses because there's nobody there.
Even in Tasmania a few years ago, Zeehan and parts down that west coast, they couldn't give houses away because the mining or whatever was there was finished. And sometimes without that, communities do die.
There's no reason for people to be there anymore.
Yeah.
We've seen quite a lot of different meaning in walking the Camino Trail. We'll have a break now, and after the break, we'll look at how you do it. We've had a look at what it means to walk the Camino. Now we'll have a look at how you do it. Alison, if someone was going to take this on, what would be a good way for them to approach it?
Okay, so start out and read, watch. Certainly watching a movie or reading a novel can give you, if you're that way inclined, that can give you a good bit of background. But also there's documentaries, there's Facebook groups, there's guidebooks. I would say find out as much about it as you can. Speak to someone who's actually done it, who's got first-hand experience. Gather as much general information as you can. And obviously you need an airfare and a passport. So make sure you've got those organised. Make sure you've got good travel insurance, because the path can be quite treacherous in places. I did mention someone had an unfortunate, they fell over. Various things can happen, and the best travel insurance is not always the cheapest that you can find off the internet. Travel insurance pays off when you need to claim, so you need to know that this company is actually going to come to the party when you make a claim. Good travel insurance. You need to be determined because, as I mentioned, we had COVID interrupt our plans. You want to be able to follow things through. When you're going to another country, if you don't speak the language, at least know the basics. Know how to say please and thank you, hello and goodbye, because that means a lot to the locals. If they can see you making an effort, they will help you out. Learn the basics of the language, and also mention befriend someone who is fluent in the language if you can. That helps too. With your accommodation, you're going to be staying in hostels, and they're often someone's family home. You'll have an evening meal, you'll have a bed, and you'll have breakfast. So book at least a day ahead, simply because they are going to be cooking a meal for you. So it's a courtesy that they know how many people they're going to be cooking for. We booked about a day ahead each time, or sometimes might have booked a couple of days ahead, because you want to try and be flexible as much as you can. We wanted to be flexible. You don't want to think, oh, we have to get to such and such today, because there might be something really interesting along the way that you stop and look at for an hour or two. So then you might want to think, oh, we won't go quite as far today because we've been having a really good time and we've stopped and looked at things. And if you've got a booking, then, oh, the pressure's on to get there. So try and be flexible, but you do need to let your host know so that they can prepare for you properly.
How do you communicate with those hosts?
So when you don't speak the language, we had an email that we'd composed in French that basically said there, because my husband Frank he joined us for some of the way as well. So we said, hello, we're 3 Australians, we're walking the Camino. Do you have a room for 3 on such and such a date? So we had that translated into French. So we would just send that off. So in the guidebooks and apps and various things, we had lists of accommodation that was available in various towns. So we would just fire off this email, and whoever came back, someone would come back, or 3 of them would come back. So you just choose the one that you want and then just let the others know that you're fine. Or the other thing that they do is they use WhatsApp, which is an app on your phone that's text. We would have a text ready in French. Google Translate is your friend. It works really well. So generally they communicate by either of those, or phone calls, but we couldn't do phone calls because
the language barrier.
Yeah, but it's text-based. And another sort of a quirk, I suppose, of the French, and out in these rural areas, they don't take credit cards generally. They take cash, but they will take cheques. No one has a chequebook in Australia anymore, but yes, in France they do. But when you're from Australia or America, carry a bit of cash, and because you're in such small villages, there won't be an ATM. When you're at a larger place where there is an ATM, get some cash so that you've got enough cash for the next few days, because you don't want to be caught without any means to pay. There are luggage transfer services if people do want to. We encountered people that needed medication that they're going to be walking for a month. They got a lot of it. It's too heavy. Or they might have been travelling on afterwards, after the Camino, so they'd have suitcases. So there's various luggage transfer services who will, it's usually about €10, I think, they'll transfer your luggage from place to place. We didn't choose to do that because that also cuts into your flexibility, because if your luggage is going to be somewhere, then you need to be that place.
You need to get there.
You need to be there as well. There's a rule of thumb that your backpack should weigh about 10% of your body weight. I think ours weighed about 5 to 6 kilos. And it was very liberating to just travel with not much stuff. You're walking for a number of weeks, the weather could get a variety of weather. So our criteria for packing was, does it scrunch up really small, does it weigh next to nothing, and does it dry in no time? If it didn't meet any of those, then it didn't go in. With clothes, there's one in your pack and one on your back. You can't be thinking, oh, but I might go out to dinner, or I might do this, or I might do that. Be firm with yourself. We wore trail shoes and toe socks, which I swear by, but everyone's different. And so you need a pair of lightweight, something like Crocs or sandals, because you do want to take your shoes off at the end of the day, but you've still got a few hours where you're having dinner and whatnot, so you put your sandals on or your lightweight shoes to give your feet a break from your walking shoes. The French, and I've only encountered this in France, but they've got a real thing about bed bugs. We never got bed bugs, but they like you to bring a silk, you can buy them anywhere, silk sleeping bag liner or a sleeping sack, and they don't let you take your backpacks or your shoes or your hiking poles into the sleeping room. You arrive and you're shown this room and you put your backpack, your shoes and your poles, you leave all that there, and you just take out your toiletries and whatever you need, and that's what you take to the room. Have those things separate so that you can easily just pull them out of your pack and take them
Yeah, that's something that you wouldn't naturally think about it.
No. So that's certainly a thing in France. And it's good to actually have all your gear inside your pack, and your pack needs to have a waterproof cover. But inside your pack, it's good to have things in waterproof little bags as well. There's
2 layers of waterproofing is better than one.
Absolutely. There is nothing worse than you only have to get all your gear wet once, and you don't do it again. You don't let it happen again. Make sure before you leave home, if you haven't walked with a backpack before, make sure that your backpack suits you, that you've got a backpack that's comfortable. When you go and buy a backpack, their places will fit them. They'll make sure that it fits, because there's backpacks for men and women because we're a different shape. And then there's also, if you're shorter or taller, or there's backpacks that suit different body shapes. So make sure that your backpack fits, because there will be nothing worse than, chafing straps and things on your backpack.
Yeah, I imagine anything that rubs will cause problems very quickly. And of course, because you're going the next day as well.
It's day after day, so you want to be physically comfortable. So make sure that you have all those issues sorted out and see what works for you before you go. And that's why I'm saying, if you haven't already done any of that sort of hiking, or you're not particularly fit, a good 6 months out, start getting those things sorted out, because you just don't want any issues once you get there. You're a long way from home.
So you need to be going on practice walks and...
Absolutely. Yep. And put some weight, whatever weight you think you're going to be carrying, put that in your backpack. You can start out with your backpack empty if you haven't done any that sort of walking before, but then gradually put weight into it so that what you're doing. Hiking poles, they're very common in Europe, but not so much in Australia, but they are excellent. And I find, especially when you've got a backpack, because it throws your weight out a bit. So if you've got poles, it just helps you to balance better. But they're just good for if this terrain is rough, you can use them to lean on. But I just find it much more comfortable walking with poles day after day. I liken it to four-wheel driving. You've got 4 points on the ground instead of 2. I'm sure it's better. I don't know all the physiological, mechanical sort of reasons for it, but I find it much more.
You can feel it.
You can. And so the proof is, at the end of the day, you feel like you could do it all again. Something's working.
And guess what? Tomorrow,
you're going to be doing it again. You need to take some sort of basic first aid. Don't think nothing's going to happen. Things like just simple things, Band-Aids and maybe a compression bandage or something. And also know the emergency numbers are for the country that you're in, because it's not always, it's 000 here, but it's not necessarily the same there. Ignorance is not bliss when you're a long way from home. Yeah. And sunscreen, especially if it's summer. A hat. You will like a SIM or an eSIM for your phone so that you've got communication, and generally, I can't remember what brand of SIM we had, but it worked. And when you're doing all your homework, people will say, oh, this SIM worked everywhere. Sometimes they won't work in some areas, but you'll find one that will work so that you've got coverage everywhere. Mm-hmm. And this, in the Via Podiensis, is particularly well marked. It's a red stripe at the top and a white stripe. So it's a red and a white stripe, and it's actually called the GR65, and it's marked everywhere. If there's not a tree or a fence post, it'll be on a rock. It's really well marked. You actually don't need to carry any sort of map with you because the way is so well marked. The only thing you've got to watch is when you're going through villages, because you can be getting talking and whatever, and you can actually lose your way even though it's a small village. Sometimes you can think, oh, where did we last see a marker? And you might have to go back. And so just through villages, you've just got to be like a slightly bigger village where there's more than a couple of streets. You can bamboozle yourself. But one of the best things is you can have guilt-free carbs, because you need carbs because you're walking every day. And France is like the king of the carbs. Who doesn't like a French bakery? In a lot of the hostels, this van would pull up in the morning and deposit a few sacks of baguettes, fresh baguettes, And so you can lay into one of those at breakfast because you're going to walk it all off during the day. And I am rather fond of cheese, and what's cheese and bread for lunch is quite nice. And then whatever meal they're cooking for you. And because you'll get a feel for the regions, because you'll eat whatever is, you'll get the region. When we started in La Puy, some people might be familiar with the Puy lentil. And so that's a lentil growing area. So around there, the meals are based around lentils, and then there's different specialties, and the host will be proud to say, this is our regional, this is what we do here. And there's a thing called, I just can't remember, aligout. It's essentially mashed potato and cheese, but it's delicious it's the way you cook it that brings these simple ingredients to another level. You get that in a few places, but you can eat it guilt-free because you're walking the next day and away you go. I did find that certainly probably in the first 5 to 600 k's, you don't actually need to carry a lot of water because there are a lot of drinking taps and troughs, probably from when they used to water the horses, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of fresh water, and this was summer and it was hot, and it will say if you can't drink it, but mostly there was water available, you could fill your bottle. So that was good, but do be prepared. Your backpack will probably come with a bladder, but you can choose whether you're going to do that or carry drink bottles, but you don't need to carry a lot of water really because it's readily available. Anyone that's done any hiking knows water's heavy.
Yeah, so to pick it up at frequent locations along the course is a lot.
Just means you're not having to carry so much at the start of the day. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Alison, for being a guest on Forest.chat podcast. Listeners of Forest.chat podcast wish you all the best with your future endeavours. I should ask, what is your next thing?
The world's a big place, Paul. There's a lot of walks that I want to do in Australia. There are actually, so the Camino started in Europe, and it's that been going for thousands of years, but there's other walks now that are called Caminos. There's one in Japan, which rather appeals. There's actually a Camino in Western Australia, which is being developed really. That starts in Perth and goes to New Norcia, and that's called the Camino Salvado. And then apart from that, there's just so many walks and so little time. We'll see how we go.
Yes, and you have life all around that, but the walks join it all together, don't they?
That's right, yep.
And would you recommend the Camino?
Absolutely. And whether it's the Camino Salvado, whether it's the Way of St. James in France, if you get the chance to do it, I highly recommend it. So many benefits for you. Yeah.
It does sound that way.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Alison. You've been listening to Forest.chat, where we talk about individual endeavour in Western Australia, what it takes, what it means, and how you do it. In today's episode, we talked with Alison Kidman about walking the Camino Trail. Remember, there are 4 ways to get involved with Forest.chat. Share the domain Forest.chat with your friends and family and people you meet. When you subscribe to the emails, you get advance notice of the episodes. Listen to the episodes at forest.chat/episodes. If you do something interesting and would like to be a guest, go to forest.chat/interview. If you'd like to support a local business, go to forest.chat/advert. I'm looking forward to joining you with our next guest. Until then, enjoy making it happen.